Okay, good evening everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Baruch Haba. We're continuing our shiurim on Sefer Bereshis. The shiurim of Tavshin Pevav are dedicated by the Israeli family, Le'ilei Nishmas, Malka, Bat Yosef, B'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchasa. She should be released to Yishav, her whole family. Rabbi Glatstein, the shiurim on Sefer Bereshis are dedicated by Dr. Zakheim Umeshpachta, Le'ilei Nishmas, Rav Shlomo Eliezer ben Rabbi Yaakov Zakheim, by Rivka, Le'ilei Nishmas Rivka Bas Tovia Halevi, and Reb David ben Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And tonight's shir is dedicated by my dear friend Rabbi Tachman, Le'ilei Nishmas, his grandmother Shifra Kela Bas Ephraim, whose yahrzeit is tonight, and as a chus for his new grandson Tizka L'Gala Torah L'Chuppah L'Masam Tovim. Okay, we have an amazing topic tonight. Obviously, on Parshas Toldos, and we're going to talk about the encounter of Yitzchak Avinu with Yaakov. He doesn't know it's Yaakov. And when Yaakov Avinu approaches, it says Vayigash, that he came close, Vayishak Loi, and he kissed him. Vayarach esreach begadav, and he smelled the aroma of his clothing. Vayivarchehu, and he blessed him. Vayomer, and he said, Re'ei, see, Reach beni, the scent of my son, Kareach sada, like the scent of a field, Asher Baruchai Hashem. By the way, it's interesting, he says, see the scent. You can't see sense. You can't see smell. Why does he should say, smell the smell of my son? Why see? Okay, this is one of the proofs that all the senses are connected. All five senses are connected. Sometimes you could hear taste, you could taste sound, you could see smell. There's a concept that the five senses are connected. So what exactly did Yitzchak Avinu mean? That look, my son, the scent is like the scent of a field that Hashem blessed. Says Rashi, what kind of field smells good? Rashi says, Sedei Tapuchim, an apple field. You ever go to an apple field? It smells very good. However, the Gemara Masechta Tainis says on this pasuk, Re'ei reach beni kareach sada asher baruchai Hashem. The Gemara says in Masechta Tainis, Re'ei reach beni kareach sada asher baruchai Hashem. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Kareach. Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'rei Shlomo bar Shilas mishmei derav kareach sada shel tapuchim, like a field of apples, like a field of apples. Says Tosfos, kareach esrogim, like a field of a citron, like a field of an Esrog. Tapucha means Esrog. It means an Esrog. The only one that says that Adam ate an apple was Steve Jobs. But he for sure did not eat an apple. He ate a Esrog, according to many. So in the Sefer Tal HaChaim, he brings something very interesting. That he brings from the Sefer Seder Hayom of Rav Moshe ben Machir, that there's something that the Daled Minim that we take on Sukkot all have in common. They're the only fruits that don't have a mazel. In other words, an apple has an angel that's appointed over the apple. That's like the in-between between God and the apple. And a banana has a banana angel. A banana angel, I don't know what the shape of the banana angel is. Now they have mezuzahs. They have a mezuzah case. It's like this. It's the shape of a banana with a piece of duct tape on it. You saw that mezuzah case? It's a special kind of mezuzah case. Or a tangerine has a tangerine malach. Or a avocado has an avocado malach. But there are no esrog malachim. There are no lulav malachim. There are no hadassah malachim. There are no aravos malachim. They're all the four species are directly under the hashgacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why Klal Yisrael is compared to a tapuach, meaning kitapuach ba'asei hayar kein doidi bein abanim, because we are directly under the providence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to the nations of the world, that they are not directly under God's providence, but there's a go-between, there's an in-between between God and them. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yaakov Avinu, Re'ei reach beni kareach hasada, meaning you're like an esrog. You're like an Esrog. An Esrog is unique that it's directly under the Hashgacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But by Esav, Hashem didn't say you're directly, Yitzchak didn't say that you're directly under the Hashgacha of Hashem. Yitzchak said that Mishmane ha'aretz hi moishavecha. Yitzchak did not invoke the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to indicate that he's still going to be under a mazal. In other words, one of the main differences between Klal Yisrael and the nations of the world, even though Hashem governs everything, is by the nations of the world, Hashem gives it over. He delegates, so to speak, the running of the nations of the world through an in-between. But with Klal Yisrael, Hashem deals with us personally. So that's what Yitzchak tells Yaakov Avinu, you smell like the smell of Esrogim. You are under the Hashgacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any in-between. So this gives us a perfect opportunity to talk about a very important topic. The topic is on everybody's minds, and that is Esrogim. Now you say, why am I talking about Esrogim? The main reason is, it's because it's on Parshas Toldos. The fact that we're going to talk about Moroccan Esrogim, and I'm going to be going there in 2 days, that's a side benefit of speaking about Moroccan Esrogim, of course. But it just happens to be the main theme of Parshas Toldos is obviously Moroccan Esrogim. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the history of Esrogim, not just Moroccan Esrogim, but Esrogim in general. We're going to talk about which Esrogim have the best yichus, okay? Because it's better than talking about which people have the best yichus. We're going to talk about and what kind of nationality of Esrog should be your Esrog of choice. And in the course of this conversation, we're going to learn a lot about halacha and history. We're going to start with an amazing tshuva. The tshuva is a tshuva of Rabbi Rafal Ankawa. Rabbi Rafal Ankawa, here, I'm going to show you a picture of him. You see? This is what he looked like. You see, this is Rabbi Rafal Ankawa. He was known as Hamalach Raphael. Rabbi Rafal Ankawa was nifter in 1935 on Daled Av, which is always the week of the Mekubalim. You have the Ari, you have the Ramami Pano, you have Reb Shamshin of Ashtrapol. We once pointed Reb Shreya Devlitsky, all the big Mekubalim. They were nifter during those couple of days. And one of them was Rabbi Rafal Ankawa. And he wrote Pa'amoyne Zahav, Pa'amoyn Verimayn, Shal Shechuvas Karnei Ra'im. He was one of the great Go'onim and Tzadikim in Morocco in the beginning of the 20th century. And he writes about the history of Moroccan Esrogim, because as we're going to see, it became very questionable what kind of Esrogim you're allowed to use, because it's important to know that your Esrog is a thoroughbred Esrog. So you say, what else is it? If it looks like an Esrog and it smells like an Esrog and it quacks like an Esrog, then it has to be an Esrog. The thing is, what are the characteristics of an Esrog? Because there's another fruit that's quite similar to an Esrog, and that fruit actually has very beautiful features, and that's a lemon. And how do we know the ancestry of the Esrog, that at some point in time, the farmers, the yoigvim, the people who tend to the orchard, maybe in order to create a more appealing looking fruit, maybe they crossbred or they grafted. So they, you cut open one branch and you wedge in the branch of another fruit, and if the two fruits take to each other, that's grafting. So the Rabbi Rafal Ankawa writes that Mimois avoiseinu va'avois avoiseinu befrois chag HaSukkos, from the days of our ancestors as Sukkot is approaching, or before that, Jews and Arabs would go to the city of Tarodant or Trodant, and they would buy from the gardeners and the owners of the Pardesim Esrogim of Mitzvah, and they would bring it to all the cities Hama'arav, meaning to the whole Maghreb, to the whole West, to all of Morocco, to all of Algiers, to all of Tunisia, all of these countries which were very rich in Jewish history, the countries of North Africa. So you have Morocco in the northwest, right bordering Spain, and then next to it is Algiers, and next to it is Tunisia, and you have an island off of Tunisia which had a big Jewish community, Jerba. They all got their Esrogim from Morocco. especially, we're going to see in a particular region in southwest Morocco. The name of this region we're going to see is called Sus Shtuka. Sus Shtuka. And we actually have a tradition regarding this region that Jews have been there literally not since the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, not since the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, but well before that. You say, what? How did Jews get to Morocco before the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash? We're going to see, the Gemara talks about, the Gemara discusses how they got there. Because there's a particular region, the region where most of the Esrogim grow, that was a established Jewish community going back to the time of the 10 tribes. So 10 tribes, what evidence is there to that? We're going to discuss that. So for example, we come to a tshuva in Chalas Tshuvas, Yafeh Sha'a. Yafeh Sha'a is Rabbi Machluf Abi Chatzera. So you say, what does he look like? I thought you might ask that question. So that's why I brought you his personal picture. Rabbi Machluf Abi Chatzera, he's a descendant of Abir Yaakov. You see? He's a descendant of Abir Yaakov. And he wrote Chalas Tshuvas Yafeh Sha'a. And he says as follows. In number 7, Marmakomis are coming. V'yadua sha'anan b'nei ma'arava. We, those who live in the west, in Morocco, roiv ha'esroigim v'chemad kulam heba me'orei Sus Basra. Most of our esroigim come from a region called Sus Basra. V'kabbalah b'yadeinu, we have a tradition. Me'avoseinu v'avois avosenu, dar achar dar. We have a tradition for many generations. She'ha'esroigim ha'hem hem ksherim aliba d'kulei alma. These esroigim are kosher according to everyone. As opposed to what esroigim? We're going to see maybe as opposed to esroigim in Eretz Yisrael. Because the Saba Kadisha, Reb Shlomo Alafandri, when he analyzed esroigim of Eretz Yisrael, he said most of them are grafted. That most of the esroigim that grow in Eretz Yisrael are morkav, or chshash morkav. So therefore, perhaps the best esrogim in the world are not coming from Eretz Yisrael. They may be coming from Morocco. As Rav Machluf Abi Chatzera says, we have a tradition for many, many, many generations that's where, that to use those esrogim. Now, that is definitely not where European Jews got their esrogim from. European Jews did not get their esrogim from Eretz Yisrael. They didn't get it from Morocco, because Morocco is completely secluded and isolated from the rest of the mainland of Jewish communities in Europe. So where did European Yidden get their esrogim from? Eastern European Jews. They got Yanova esrogim. Yanov is from Italy, Italian esrogim. And that for Jews got Yanova esrogim for many hundreds of years until 1809. And we're going to see what happened in 1809. Now, let's talk about this interesting region in southwest Morocco. So there's a sefer that is a very important sefer. It's almost like the Chidah's Shem HaGadolim on Moroccan Gadolim. It's called Malki Rabbanan. And it was written by Rabbi Yosef ibn Danan. And there's a haskama there from Rabbi Shaul ibn Danan. And he says that the settlement of Jews in Morocco is extremely ancient, that everybody agrees Jews have been in Morocco for more than 2,000 years. By the way, that's longer than Jews have been in Brooklyn. You know that? Jews have only been in Brooklyn for like 1,800 years. No, just joking. They've only been there for, they're lucky if they're 100 years. Actually, where I come from in Brooklyn, Jews were there for 60 years, and then they decided to move to Lakewood. So, Jews don't stay long in a community. So to be somewhere for a few hundred years is a very long time. To be somewhere for 2,000 years, that's like all of eternity. So he says we have a tradition. Jews were in Morocco for more than 2,000 years. When? And they became successful and they proliferated and they basically reached every corner and city throughout Morocco. Now, this area where these esrogim come from, we called it, Rav Machluf Abi Chatzera says it's called Sus Basra. Did you ever hear of that region? Are you familiar with that region? If you look in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Gemara talks about the exiling of the Aseres Hashvatim. And the Gemara says on Tzadidal Amud Aleph, number 9 on the sheet, Lehecha Agle. The sheets hopefully are coming soon. Where were they exiled to? Marzutra Amar La Africa. The 10 tribes were exiled to Africa. So when you hear about African tribes and they say, they have Jewish practices and they keep Shabbos or they have Taras HaMishpacha, you got to wonder, are they from the Aseres Hashvatim? Some say that the Ethiopian Jews were from Shevet Dan. There's such a claim, there's such a possible tradition. Anyway, Rabbi Chanina Amar, they were exiled Lahare Slug. And the Gemara says that the zechus of king of Ashur to be able to dominate the Jewish people is he never disparaged Eretz Yisrael. But Klal Yisrael spoke about the Gnus of Eretz Yisrael. You know why? When they got to a region called Sos, they said, Sos, Shavia. Sos means this is equal to Eretz Yisrael. Sos is today, it's a region in Morocco. And the Gemara says when the Jews got to Sos, they said Sos means it's on par with Eretz Yisrael. When they got to Arin, when they got to Alman, when they got to an area called Alman, they said Ka'alman. It's like our world, it's like our land. Kimatu Sus Trey, when they got to the second Sus, and there is an area in Morocco called Sus Trey, in other words, a second Sus, or they call it Sus Shtuka. They said, Amri al-Chad terrain. They said that means that this land is twice as good as Eretz Yisrael. So the Jewish people disparaged Eretz Yisrael, and what this means, many suggest, is that the Jews in the times of Aseres Hashvatim, they were exiled at least 100 years before the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, and one second, you're not finished. Make sure everyone gets. Good job. The name of the area is called Sus Shtuka, and that's what the Gemara refers to it as. Sus Trey, a second area of Sus. And that's primarily the southwest of Morocco, the coast of Morocco, and the area today is called Tradant. And also we're going to talk about another city where many Mikubalim lived, and many of the Esrog orchards are found. Okay, so the bottom line is the Minchas Yitzchak, Shalos Teshuvos Minchas Yitzchak, which was more of a contemporary Shalos Teshuvos sefer. Thank you. He says, when the Rambam writes in his Hakdama to Perush HaMishnayos, that the Rambam says, without any doubt, from Yeshua until now, the Esrog that was taken with the lulav every year, the Rambam says that our tradition is supported from the fact that for 3,300 years, we're all taking the Daled Minim, the Lulav and the Esrog. So it says in Minchas Yitzchak, when the Rambam says that everybody's taking the 4 species, but let's analyze, where did the Rambam live? The Rambam lived in Morocco. He lived in Fez. And when he said that Jews have been taking the Daled Minim for many generations, what was the Rambam looking at? He was looking at the Daled Minim people were taking in Fez. And in Fez, where did they get the Daled Minim from? Well, they got it from Sus Shtuka, from that area of Morocco. So that means when the Rambam talks about the authenticity of the transmission of what Daled Minim are from generation, he was specifically referring to the Daled Minim that he was looking at, namely the Moroccan Daled Minim. In fact, there's actually a story or a legend about how the Rambam was ultimately thrown out of Morocco, brought in the Sefer Eliyahu Zuta Rabbi Yoel Kapsali. He says there was a particular sukkos, and Maimonides, the Rambam, went out of the shul, and like the minog of Jews, he walked home holding the Daled Minim. That was, like the Anshe Yerushalayim, they would hold the Daled Minim in the street. And he met the king, according to some, it means the king of Morocco. And the king sees him walking around with the laurels and the citron, and it does look a little bizarre. Imagine, you saw people walk out of their house of worship, and they're holding a mango and a palm tree, Well, what do you do in a cactus or something? So the king said, what you're doing is ridiculous. You're acting like a fool, the king tells the Rambam. What your practices are insanity. And the Rambam got very upset, and he recognized that the king was mocking his religion, and the Rambam responded, I'm not a Meshuggah. I didn't drink. No. Meshuggahs, you know what they do? They throw rocks at their Avodah Zarah. But I am following the ancient practice of the Jewish people. And the Rambam's kavanah was to be mavazeh, the Das Yishmaelim, because until that time, their practice was to throw stones like the minhag of Markulas. The king at first didn't understand, and when the king went back, his advisor says, you're going to let the Rambam get away with that? He's mocking your religion. He's saying that it's a foolish practice to throw stones at your icons. And when the king got very upset, and the king decreed that the Rambam achas dasai lahamas, and the Rambam had no choice, and the Rambam left Morocco and he went to Egypt. So actually, the whole movement of the Rambam out of Morocco going to Egypt was because of the mitzvah of Daled Minim. The point of the Minchas Yitzchak is, when the Rambam discusses the authenticity of the transmission of the various cheftze mitzvah that we deal with, the Rambam was referring to the Daled Minim of Morocco. So, in terms of the tradition of this particular area, I want to bring you now to a city that today is called Mogador. You know about it? Shachar? Shachar has been there. So it exists. It's actually there. When you went there, it was there?
I swear it's near there.
Actually, they changed the name of the city. Mogador is now called Esrog. Esrog. If you want to know what it looks like, here's a picture. It's on the seacoast. It's an area that has beautiful orchards. It's an ancient city on the sea. So you say, that would be perfect for like shooting all kinds of things that you would want to video. So I'm not going to tell you on the screen, but many, many things have taken place there that are not meant to discuss right now. Okay? But it's a beautiful city. It's a city of Mikubalim. First and foremost, Reb Chaim Pinto Hagadol is from Esrog, or Mogador. Today it's called Esrog. So the whole Pinto family comes from Reb Chaim Pinto Hagadol. Then you have the Shalsheles, the dynasty of the Rabbanim of Koriat, starting with Rabbi Avram Raphael Koriat, the author of Zechus Avos. See, we have people today that came all the way from London to come to the shir. But actually, we're going to learn about, we're going to have to go back to London in a few minutes, actually, in the shir. So it's a good thing you came now. Now, the progenitor of the Koriat, the dynasty, is Rabbi Avram Raphael Koriat. He's the author of Shalas Teshuvos Chosavos. His son was Rabbi Yehuda Koriat, the author of Ma'ar Vashemesh. His grandson was Rabbi Avram Koriat, the author of Shalas Teshuvos Brisavos. And the Av Bezdin was Hagoin Rabbi Yosef Al-Maliach. And he was the one who gave certification of all the Esrogim that came out of the port of Mogador, and they were headed to cities all over the world, including London. And this was a major area of export of Daled Minim all over the world. Now, it's very interesting. Is there a way to tell if an Esrog is a thoroughbred or if it's grafted? Is there any way to tell? Could you look at it and say, this looks like phony, or this looks real? Obviously, if let's say the seller gives you an Esrog, and it's shaped like a long stick in a curve, and it has like this point on top, and you peel it, and inside is a banana, probably it's not an esrog, you know what I mean? Or let's say you cut it open, and it has green rind and a red triangle. It's probably not an esrog, it might be a watermelon. Right? So how do you know if an esrog is an esrog? Does it have to be yellow? Are there ways to know if it's grafted or not? So it's interesting, the achronim have uncovered 4 ways to determine whether an esrog is grafted or if it's a thoroughbred esrog. Number 1, a grafted esrog is smooth. Smooth, no bumps. It's not bumpy. A natural esrog has blitos. So, some people say, look at this esrog, look how smooth it is. This is not a shave, pal. This is an esrog. If it's smooth, it's a lemon. One of the simanim of an esrog is it being smooth if it doesn't have blitos. Another quality of a morkav, a grafted esrog, is that a grafted esrog, the ukitz, the bottom of it, protrudes. An esrog, the ukitz, the bottom, is shakua, into the esrog. It doesn't protrude. That's another quality of an esrog. Also, if you cut open the esrogim, a grafted esrog, the inside is very wide. And in other words, the way you could tell is how much space the flesh of the fruit occupies, how much space the seed chamber occupies. If it's wide, then it's a morkav. If it's thinner, it's an esrog. And finally, another determination that the achronim have discovered is that in esrog, the seeds are upright, and grafted, the seeds are horizontal. Okay? So now, are these tests, are these simanim foolproof? Is it absolutely definitive that an esrog has these 4 qualities, and if it doesn't have these 4 qualities, it's puzzle? As we're going to learn, that as important as these simanim are, the most important thing is the continuous tradition and knowledge that these orchards have been used continuously without anybody challenging them. The chazaka is much more important than the simanim. The simanim are not the oiraisa. In other words, all of these qualifications and signs of a kosher esrog are not the oiraisa. So let's progress over here. In terms of the tradition of these esrogim, we're going to now go to the Shalos Teshuvos Zechus Avos. Zechus Avos was written by Rabbi Avram Koriat, and he says something amazing. He says that the Moroccan esrog has become the paragon of what an esrog should look and smell like, that if other esrogim do not have the qualities of a Moroccan esrog, they're just simply puzzle. Now, for example, there was a particular esrog that came out to the market, and it was tasted, and it tasted very tart, tasted bitter. And Rabbi Avram Koriat says, wait a second, Moroccan esrogim are sweet, and the quintessential esrog is a Moroccan esrog, and Moroccan esrog are sweet, and therefore, any fruit that's bitter is pasal, even though it doesn't say in the Gemara that an esrog has to be sweet. I would have thought it's a citrus fruit. It could be tart, it could be... No. The Moroccan esrog became the quintessential paragon of an esrog, that if it doesn't have the aesthetic or taste quality of Moroccan esrog, they disqualify the esrog. So that's just an example of how the Moroccan esrog was considered so pure in its lineage that all other esrogim were measured up to the standards of the Moroccan esrogim. And this is brought lahalacha in the Sefer Pekudas Elazar, of Rabbi Rafal Elazar ben Tubi. Here we have another important tshuva. Look at number 15. Shalos Teshuvos Higid Mordechai, from Rav Mordechai Ashio, from one of the rabbis of Salonika. And he says something very interesting. So far we mentioned the qualities of a kosher esrog are, it has blitos, its bottom is shakua, it's sunk into the esrog itself. It has a certain, the chamber of the seeds is a certain side. The seeds have to be upright. It should be sweet. And now, listen to this, says Rabbi Mordechai Ashio, one of the leading rabbis in Salonika. He said another siman that we find is that the esrog, aside from the seeds being upright, they also are few. They're not full of seeds. But the moment you graft a lemon and an esrog, one of the ramifications of this mixed marriage, if you call it, of a lemon and an esrog, is it causes a proliferation of seeds. If you've ever seen a grafted esrog, you open it up, it's just popping with seeds. There are tons of seeds in it. Why? Because it's a mixed marriage of the esrog and the lemon. And therefore, the Moroccan esrogim, since they have very few seeds, that is the benchmark. That is the barometer to determine the kashrus of an esrog. All you need to do is, by the way, if you ever want to know, is my esrog kosher? Go to the store, slice it open it up, and then you'll see how many seeds are in it. Now, I'm sure the seller would be very happy if you use that to determine the kashrus of esrog, because then after doing that, you would have to buy another one. But maybe, that's why people like to travel on Sukkot. What they do is they put it in in their suitcase, then they run to see on the X-ray that it's going through. You ever see why are Jews hanging out in the airport on Chol Hamoed Sukkot? Because they have no way to determine if their esrog is kosher. But what they do is they buy a ticket, they put it through security, they look on the inside, and they don't even get on the plane. They just want to make sure that the esrog is kosher. Yeah, it's an old trick. Anyway, or you give it a sonogram. I bet in the farm stores, in the Judaica stores, they should start selling sonograms for esrogim. That is a determining quality. In other words, how many seeds on it. So it's very interesting. There's a couple years ago, after I was at the kever of Reb Chaim Falaji in Turkey, I wanted to go to the kever of Reb Chaim Falaji's grandfather, the Shailas Teshuvas Chikrei Lev, Reb Rafal Chazan. So I took out my handy book from Har HaZeisim. I located it on the map, but just because you could locate it on the map, actually finding it in Har HaZeisim was a little bit of an ordeal. Baruch Hashem, we ended up finding the kever of the grandfather, Reb Chaim Falaji, Reb Rafael Chazan. But he had a son. Reb Rafael Chazan's son is named Reb Chaim Chazan. Reb Chaim Chazan. And he was a Rav in Izmir. He was born in Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan in 1891. And he ultimately came up to Eretz Yisrael when he was 64 years old. When Reb Chaim Abulafia passed away, he became the Rishon LeZion. So he became the preeminent posek in the early 20th century in Yerushalayim, Reb Chaim Chazan. Not the Chikrei Lev, the Shas Teshuvas Yishrei Lev. He's also buried on Har HaZeisim, although I've never found him. And he's one of the major sources on the ancestry of Moroccan esrogim. So the year was 1864. Taf Reish Chav Daled. And the question was raised by Avram ben Sa'adon. And you know where he lived? In London. That's why I brought my friend Robert from London tonight. He flew in just for the shir to... Do you remember Rabbi Avram Sadon from 1864? I'm dating you. No, I'm joking. It's a little hazy, right? A few years before your time. So he was a merchant in the port in London. I'm sorry, he was a merchant in Mogador. And he sent to London okay, let's revamp that. Rabbi Avram ben Sadon, he lived in London. He imported from Mogador all the daled minim for the city. He got a hechsher from the rabbis of Mogador. And Rabbi Avram ben Sadon wanted to sell to the Jewish community in London these esrogim that were imported from Mogador, from Morocco. So the people in London said, we don't know Morocco. We never heard of Morocco. Where is that? Is that near Borough Park? Where's Morocco? So he said, you never heard of Morocco? It's there are thousands of Go'inim and Tzaddikim there. So the people told him, if you want to sell us esrogim, you need certification from the local rabbi. Who's the rabbi in London in the 1860s? Nathan Marcus Adler, Reb Nosson Adler, not to be confused with Reb Nosson Adler. Okay? This is a relative of Reb Nosson Adler. I believe he was born shortly after Reb Nosson Adler passed away. He was born 3 years after he passed away. When I was in London, I made sure to go to the kever of Nathan Marcus Adler. And Reb Nosson Adler, Nathan Marcus Adler, authored the most important work ever written on Targum Onkelos. It's called Nesina Lager. Nesina Lager. And Nathan Marcus Adler said, who was the chief rabbi of London at the time, of England, that you could rely on the kashrus of these esrogim, provided that you write a letter to the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, the Rishon LeZion, Rabbi David Chazan, and he'll tell you whether the rabbis in Mogador are reliable or not. So in other words, basically what's happening is this London businessman imports the esrogim from Morocco. The people in London say, we're not buying it until we get a haskama. So he goes to Nathan Marcus Adler, Rav Nosson Adler, and he says, will you endorse these esrogim? He said, I'll endorse them if you write a letter to the Rishon LeZion in Eretz Yisrael, and he'll let you know whether the rabbis in Morocco are reliable or not. So he writes to Reb David Chazan, and he says in a very respectful way, he says, I kiss the ground that you, Reb David Chazan, stand on. Please share with me your opinion. Our chief rabbi said that we can only use the esrogim from Mogador if you, Reb David Chazan, endorse them. What is your opinion? Okay, so that's the letter. Now, Reb David Chazan never made it to Morocco. He doesn't know the rabbis from Morocco. He was from Turkey. So he, in turn, turns to three great rabbanim from Morocco, who they lived in three different parts of the country, and they basically tell him as follows. He said, these three rabbis are Rav Moshe Toledano, Rav Rafal Yosef Charush, and Rav David ben Shimon. Rav David ben Shimon has a nickname. He's called Suf Devash. Devash stands for David ben Shimon. And they write as follows. Me oilam loy shamanu v'loy ra'inu. We never heard, we never saw. Misha irer I pikbek al esrogim and askarim. Anyone who ever challenged esrogim in Morocco. Nobody ever said one bad word about Moroccan esrogim. Not like the esrogim in Eretz Yisrael, which were challenged and were questioned. Nobody ever had a bad word to say about Moroccan esrogim, and this is what they report back to Reb David Chazan. And Reb David Chazan writes back to the London businessman, your esrogim are good to go, and he was able to import the esrogim back to Morocco, back to London. Okay. Now, the author of the Yishrei Lev, Reb David Chazan, brings the testimony of these three great rabbis, and then he adds to it. He says, besides the fact that nobody from Morocco ever questioned the authenticity of these esrogim, but there were so many great Go'inim who lived in Morocco for hundreds and hundreds of years, and everybody knows that these esrogim were sold to France and to other countries, and nobody challenged them, and therefore Reb David Chazan gave his support of the purchase of the esrogim of Morocco. And again, we mentioned that one of the great rabbis who testified to Reb David Chazan about the purity of the lineage of the esrogim in Morocco was Rav David ben Shimon. And you wanted to know what he looked like, so I made sure that to get his picture. Okay? Rav David ben Shimon. He looks very righteous. So obviously, that. Look at this tzaddik. Could you see? Rav David ben Shimon is called Suf Devash. Based on the testimony of Rav David ben Shimon, if you look in the Stei Chemed writes in Asifas Dinim, Mareches Daled Minim, Siman Aleph Ois Daled. You have it on your sheets over here in number the second 16, that the question came all the way from London, to Rav David Chazan, and he looked into it, and he heard the testimony of 3 Rabbanim that there's no chashash, and he certified the Esrogim of Morocco. And indeed, the Tzuf Devash testified that in Morocco, in Trudant, everybody relies on these Esrogim. Also, Rav Yosef Masos, who was born in 1892 in Meknez, says that regarding the Esrogim in Eretz Yisrael, that there was a rabbi in Tzfas and Tveria, he said most of the Esrogim in Eretz Yisrael are morkav. They're mostly grafted. Can you imagine? Even though it's considered preferable, if you can, to try to get Dal and Minim from Eretz Yisrael. But there was strong rumors that the Esrogim in Eretz Yisrael were grafted. But the Esrogim from Taradant, which is in Morocco, which provides to Marrakesh and to Algiers, we never heard that there's any concern whatsoever of grafting. And likewise, in the Sefer Shailas Utshuva Simchas Kohen of Rav Rachamim Chai Chavisa HaKohen, he brings, who is, by the way, the Rosh Av Bezin of Jerba. Jerba is an island off of Tunisia. In the shul in Jerba, the doors of the shul are material that came from the first Beis HaMikdash. That's how ancient the community is. And it was a tradition for people to make a pilgrimage there every Lag BaOmer. He brings that even though in his city in Jerba they have Esrogim that grow there, but there is not a clear tradition that they were never grafted. And regarding the Esrogim that are brought from Morocco, and these Esrogim came without certification, without any testimony, the tradition in the Jewish people, based on the Yishrei Lev and other poskim, is that any Esrog that comes from Sus Basra of Morocco has no concern at all. There is no chashash harkava. There's no problem with harkava. Likewise, Rav Matzliach Mazuz, as reported by his son, Rabbi Meir Mazuz, the Rosh Yeshiva of Kisei Rachamim, he says something very interesting. He said, I want to tell you something. I come from Tunisia. I'm a resident of Tunisia. And nobody ever wants to put down the Esrogim of their hometown. But nevertheless, I saw that my father, Rav Matzliach Mazuz, was makbid Davka to get an Esrog only from Morocco and not from anywhere else. They're considered the most pure of all the Esrogim. Okay, so far we've established that for hundreds of years, the communities of North Africa and beyond receive their Esrogim from Morocco without any challenge, without any kitrug, without any complaint.
What was the purpose of grafting? To produce more?
Why? The grafting, because you got different quality fruit. It made it more yellow. It made it smoother. So, it made it more appealing.
But then it doesn't have the characteristics, the 4 characteristics that just.
Of course not. These were not grafted.
What did they do?
Because these were Moroccan Arabs. And they wanted nice fruits. They weren't doing this
Why
for...
would they use that for why would they use those for the mitzvah of Esrog, for the aluminum?
Because they could fool people into buying them because they look nicer. It was...
But they know that it doesn't have the 4 characteristics.
As we said, the 4 characteristics were created by Achronim that lived in Europe. It doesn't... we don't know that the Moroccan Achronim would base their judgment on these 4 characteristics. It wasn't usually... it wasn't, so to speak, embraced in Morocco. If you look in Shas Teshuvos Chassam Sofer, he says that the simanim that we mentioned are not d'oraisa. They're not mentioned in Shas. They're not mentioned anywhere. It's like birds, right? When it comes to kosher birds, there's no official siman of which birds are kosher, which birds are not kosher. Therefore, the Chassam Sofer says, and now what I'm getting to is that with all of this great tradition for the purity of Moroccan esrogim, Eastern European Jews never got Moroccan esrogim. For hundreds of years, they got what is known as Yanava esrogim. These were esrogim from Italy. The Chassam Sofer says we have a tradition from our forefathers, from our rabbis, from the Rishonim from France, or from Germany, that they, for many generations, were yotzei the mitzvah with Yanava esrogim. And these esrogim, they don't need a siman. In other words, a siman is not required. If you have a tradition that a certain orchard is a good place to get an esrog, no further simanim are needed. It's only if you don't know where the esrog came from, then with these simanim, you could use the simanim as a barometer. It came from a valid place. And if it doesn't have these simanim, then you could assume it didn't come from a valid place. But if you know it came from a bad place, the simanim don't help. And if you know it came from a good place, the simanim are irrelevant. This was all until the year 1809.
Are there any orchards in the United States?
The only orchards in the United States that I know about are in my kitchen in Cedarhurst, where currently I have esrogim growing and lemons.
So why don't they grow here?
Because in order to grow lemons or esrogim in the United, and I'm serious, in order to grow in the United States, you need sunlight most of the year.
All right.
And
California, Florida, yeah.
no, it doesn't have the right climate. But if you come to my kitchen, we bought a special light, seriously, and we're growing esrogim. Now it might take many years, but so far so good. And then we'll be the first to have Cedarhurst esrogim, okay? But hopefully Mashiach will come before then. Okay, in any event, this was all until the year 1809. What happened in the year 1809? There were wars in the world. By the way, in the Sefer Birchas Moshe, he brings, the way to remember 1809 is its gematria pre-Eitz Hadar. And in that year, Napoleon, when Napoleon rose to power, and he was on world conquest, so all the roads between Italy and France and Germany were in battle, in war. They were closed off, and there was no travel. And therefore, the Yanava esrogim became obsolete. They could not get esrogim from Italy. And instead, they turned to an island of Greece, and this island produced the most magnificent esrogim, and they started to get esrogim from an island called Corfu. You ever hear of Corfu? Corfu is an island off of Greece. So now, for hundreds of years, the Jews of France and Germany, they're getting their esrogim from Yanav, which is Genoa, and now they have to get their esrogim from Corfu. However, rumors began to spread that the esrogim of Corfu were grafted. In fact, the most outspoken Achron who challenged the Corfu esrogim was the Chamudei Daniel, Rabbeinu Daniel, the Rav of Haradna. And he challenged the kashrus of the Corfu esrogim, and already in the year 1805, he paskined, you can't make a bracha on the Corfu esrogim. The Chamudei Daniel paskined, if you're going to get a Corfu esrog, you need to say, Brich Rachmana instead of Baruch Atah Hashem. You can't say the name of God because these Esrogim were probably grafted. Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Ragolos challenged him. He said, no, he proved that these Esrogim were of pure lineage. And a great debate erupted among the Achronim. Can you take the Esrog from Corfu? After all, they were not able to get any more the Yanav Esrogim. Is Corfu considered a valid place to get the Esrogim? Some say that, well, it depends where in Corfu you got it from. Originally, they were getting it from a location that had pure orchards, and then there were outskirts that it was grafted, and it became mixed up. And in the Sefer Nefesh Chaya, you have it on your sheet in number 23, he brings that he met someone who visited the island of Corfu, and while visiting the island of Corfu, he heard from old men. The old men said, Esrogim never grew on the whole island. We never even had Esrogim in Corfu. And that caused the whole issue to erupt, because these Zakanim said at Meisech Lefi Tumam that there were never Esrogim in Corfu. All they had in Corfu were lemons. He brings that when he was in Warsaw, he spoke with messengers who traveled to Corfu, and they said when they were there, they heard from Zakanim who said that many of the islands never had anything but lemons. And then when they found out that Jews wanted Esrogim, they made sure to make the claim that these were ancient Esrogim. So the bottom line is, perhaps the greatest posek of the era was Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, the Aruch LaNer. And the Aruch LaNer was also among those who were very outspoken against the Corfu Esrog. And the Aruch LaNer writes in the Bikurei Yaakov in Sim Taf Reish Mem Ches that the Achronim that discuss the various simanim of the Esrog, these simanim are not absolute, and therefore you cannot rely on the simanim, not to kasher an Esrog, not to pasel an Esrog, and you can't use the Esrogim of Corfu. And Rav Yaakov Ettlinger actually amazingly writes in Tosefes Bikurim, which is like an addition to his Sefer Bikurei Yaakov, that many times he saw the Esrogim from Yushalayim, and to him they looked exactly as bad as the Esrogim from Corfu. And he finally got his hands on a Moroccan Esrog, and the Moroccan Esrog was the most beautiful of all. He never in his life saw an Esrog as beautiful as the Moroccan Esrog. So the Corfu Esrog became so controversial that Rabbi Yosef Zechariah Stern asked Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, who was the greatest posek of the time, to make a ban, to ban Corfu Esrogim. But Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, you have here on the sheets in number 26, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan was hesitant to put an absolute ban on the Corfu Esrogim. He wanted more information on it, so what he did was, very wisely, he said, what we're going to do is we're going to say that at least in our community in Kovna, the Jews for 1 year should not buy the Corfu Esrog. Not because it's definitively puzzle, but because since the Yanava Esrog was not attainable anymore because of the Napoleonic War, so the Corfu sellers were jacking up the prices and they were trying to rip the Jews off. So Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan said, in the meantime, let's absolutely definitively determine the authenticity of the Corfu Esrogim, and for 1 year time, let's make a temporary ban to try to break the Corfu Esrog union of there was a powerful Corfu Esrog union, and that was the decision of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan. But what's interesting is not everybody outlawed the Corfu Esrog, and I'm going to share with you one particular posek who was in favor and said that the Corfu Esrog was okay. And by the way, this is all by way of introduction, not for more of this year, but for the rest of the series. The great Avnei Nezer, Shal Shechuvas Avnei Nezer, the Sachat Shava Rebbe, in Choshen Mishpat, Siman Kuf Tesvav, he says, everybody knows that the Chayz of Lublin used the Corfu Esrog. And if the Chayz of Lublin used the Esrog, you could rely on that. He must have seen Beruach HaKodesh that it wasn't grafted. Now, I can't say I understand that. I can't say I could understand how you could assume that somebody had Ruach HaKodesh to determine something wasn't grafted. And even if somebody did have Ruach HaKodesh, would that be a halachic factor to be able to use an esrog if there are legitimate concerns that it was grafted? But then the Avnei Nezer says a very interesting lamdas. It is well known that Polish Jews were not makbid on chadash, meaning we're not makbid on yashan. They were not makbid only to have grain that grew, that grain that grew before the second day of Shavuos, before the second day of Pesach. They were not makbid on that, even though it's a suffix d'oraisa. Why is that? They relied on the Chayz of Lublin. The Chayz of Lublin, it is well known that the Chayz of Lublin was not makbid on Yashan. Now, how do we know he wasn't makbid on Yashan? Because if you would go to his house, on his table was new bread. It was new bread. It was chadash. And if you would ask the Chayz of Lublin, why are you eating chadash? He would say, because everybody knows the Bach, my grandfather, was lenient about chadash. Everybody knows the Bach was not machmir on chadash. So, says the Avnei Nezer, it could be the reason why the Chayz of Lublin was not makbid on Corfu Esrog is because the Bach had a very interesting shita. The Bach's shita is that if you have a grafted Esrog into a lemon, since it has the same color of an Esrog, it's kosher. But we don't paskin that way. But the Chayz of Lublin did. So to say that just because the Chayz of Lublin used the Corfu Esrog, we could use the Corfu Esrog? No, maybe the reason he used the Corfu Esrog is he was relying on the Bach. The Bach was not machmir on grafted Esrogim if it looked like an Esrog. And therefore the Avnei Nezer is not 100% sure that this was permitted. There were other achronim that allowed the Corfu Esrog, and they were the Rabbi Yehuda, the Chayz of Lublin, Rabbi Yitzchak of RabbiDG, the Maggid of Kozhnitz. They all used the Corfu Esrog. Okay? And maybe in the next year we'll speak about the import of the Moroccan Esrogim to Poland and Lithuania for the first time, and then whether in fact there is any controversy regarding the status of the Moroccan Esrogim. And until next time, I wish you all a wonderful evening. Bracha v'atzlacha.
Bye.
Kol tov. Have a good night, everyone. Kol tov. Bye-bye.
Italy has the